There's a real chance the people on your team are misclassified right now, and you'd have no idea. Not because you cut a corner, not because, you've intentionally done something wrong, but because nobody's actually explained the rules to you. It starts with one freelancer, right? One contractor. The project never really ends, though. It just continues, and you end up needing more help. You did what you already knew worked, right? And now you have a team of 8 contractors, and it's been fine, but fine isn't a legal standard. Today, we're going to talk about how to tell if somebody is a contractor, how it can catch up to you, and the most important part, how you can actually fix it. Because everybody explains the problem, but nobody really tells you the solution. So it's really, really easy to end up in this situation. I want you to give yourself some grace here. Nobody decides to misclassify an employee. It always just accidentally happens. You know, Maybe you've started a business and you just need help with some specific things. And again, there's no end date to that project. The person then continues to work for you on a contract basis, but their hours start increasing. And before you know it, they're working for you almost 40 hours a week. You may be their only client, and they're dedicating all of their time to your business. Ways that you could see this pop up, if you're a brick and mortar, like a cafe or a retail store, you have people who are 1099 contractors working on your schedule, in your shop, in your uniform, if you have one. If you're a wellness facility, maybe you have renters whose rates, hours, and clients are actually controlled by you, the business. If you're in a creative industry, the freelancer who's worked 40 hours for you for 2 years may only be working for you at this point. And let's say you're a tech company, right? The contractor who you hired to fully function as a contractor is now fully functioning as a third engineer on your team. So if you set the schedule, you control how they work, when they work, where the work gets done, and they're only working for you, the label on the paperwork doesn't matter. That is an employee. So, it really is a giant risk, especially for small businesses. And the government and different states are really starting to crack down on this. So think about the test aspect, right? The Department of Labor and the IRS each have their own set of tests, but the overarching theme is control. It's not what you call them. It's not what they agreed to. And it's not what everyone in your industry does. It's about the control of the work itself. So 3 buckets. We have behavioral, financial, and the relationship. So behavioral, you set the hours, methods, training, location. That's employee territory right there. For financial, you provide the tools. They can't profit or lose. They don't have other clients, employee territory. And the relationship, ongoing, indefinite, the core of what your business does relies on them. That's employee territory. A contractor essentially runs their own business. They're serving multiple clients. They're not all in on just your business. Some states may be stricter than the federal guidelines. And by saying, they signed a contractor agreement, that doesn't fully protect you. So it can really catch up with you. Usually it's not a random audit. Usually it's a person that flags concerns about back taxes or, overtime pay that they missed out on. Maybe someone files for unemployment and can't. So now the state starts asking some questions. And I've actually seen this situation happen a few times. If somebody gets hurt on the job or in your location, they're not covered by workers' comp if they're a contractor. So let's say they go to file workers' comp and it flags, you're not actually an employee, and questions start to get asked. If somebody leaves unhappy, they can absolutely file a claim, no matter how civil a departure is, it could always lead to somebody filing a claim of some sort. And the next reason that this sometimes happens, somebody just looks it up. They wonder, hey, should I be a contractor or an employee? And they find out that the work that they're doing, that they've actually been eligible for benefits this entire time, for unemployment, for all these other things that you pay into as an employee. And so, if you do find yourself in this situation, you could be responsible for back payroll taxes, unpaid overtime, penalties, interest, and it's all retroactive, including for the people who've already left. So if you get fined for one person, they're going to look into the rest of your employees and they're going to go back. So you're going to be retroactively fined. Think about that. It could be extremely costly and time consuming. And it's just, honestly, it's a real bummer for everybody. So I don't want you to end up in this situation. It really could be just someone having one bad day and, raising that flag, and there is nothing you can do about it at that point. So I really want people to set themselves up for success in the beginning. So how can you do that, right? Like, you always hear about things that can go wrong, but how can you stop these things from happening and prevent it? So I would say do an honest audit. Like, step one, right off the bat, if you can't do it yourself or you feel uncertain about doing yourself, this is absolutely the place I start with most of my clients, is an HR audit. And this is one of the biggest things I go through. Job descriptions, if you already have them, we make sure that everybody in that job description is classified correctly. If you don't have a job description, we built those out first so that you can then classify that role. This is always a misconception as well. It doesn't matter person by person, whether they're an employee or a contractor. It matters by the job. So the role that they're in, you're classifying the role, not the person in the role. So let's say you have an account exec, right? And that's an employee position, and you have 4 people in that role. All 4 of those must be employees then, because that's the nature of the job. Now, if you have somebody else who you just bring on for a short project to fill in a gap, that could be a contractor, but there's a defined period of time. It's for a specific thing that needs to be done. You're hiring them based on their skill set, their specific skill set, and you are asking for their expertise. So that's a way to handle that situation. But with the audit, if you're going to do it yourself, list every person in your company and the role that they have, and think about, do I control the schedule? Do I control how they're doing the work, right? Am I telling them the steps, the tools that they need to use to get to the outcome? Do they work only for me? Is what they do core to my business? And, I want you to be brutally honest when you're thinking about this, because the only person that it's going to hurt is you and your business. So make sure you're being brutally honest. Then I would sort into 3 different sections. So people who are clearly employees, right? No question about it. People who are clearly contractors, no question about that. And then the I'm not sure. And so this is where you go and reach out for help. I don't recommend guessing for this at all, because it can be very costly. The cost that you will pay to bring in an expert to help you with this is significantly lower than it would be if you were to get audited and then fined. And then the third step, make sure you're converting them properly. So this is where I find that business owners get really, really nervous. They panic. Sometimes they freeze and they don't move forward with this. It's a process, right? And it's about communication. So let's say you've had historically a team of just contractors. And I've seen this happen where small businesses start out, right, with a team of contractors that slowly start to get into that gray territory. So the first step is getting a payroll system set up. This is honestly one of my favorite spots to work with business owners to find the right payroll and HRIS solution for them. There's so many different ones out there, and they all are really good at different things. Some have great customer service, some have terrible customer service. Some do Absolutely everything. Some you have to pay for in modules. So really, we figure out what's right for you and your business. And if you're doing it yourself, make sure you figure out what are your must-haves from a payroll or HRIS system. So make sure to get that set up so that you can properly pay people. Payroll systems are so important because they take out the right taxes for the right states that you're in. It's really a level of security for yourself. You can automate it. You can have people punching in and out through them. So really, it's a safeguard for you and your business. You need offer letters for absolutely everybody you're converting. So, just like hopefully you had a contractor's agreement with these people, you'll now provide them with an offer letter. And there's a lot of things that need to be involved in an offer letter. So make sure you are having all of that information in there: where they're working, their start date, whether they're part-time, full-time, hourly, or salary, or non-exempt, exempt, pay schedules, what their pay is, the cadence of it, the days that they're paid on. There's a lot of information that needs to be provided in an offer letter. Some states actually have requirements. I know New York has a notice that you have to send to each new hire, as well as anytime you change somebody's pay, that declares the amount of pay, when they're paid, how they're paid, if they're eligible for overtime, what that amount is. And so I always recommend just putting these in offer letters as well. Anything that is associated with pay. So if you provide any benefits, time off, that should all be there in there as well, because that's a part of the total compensation. A job description, you should absolutely be providing, not just if you're converting, but like these go for any new hires. If you are hiring employees, you need all of these things. So a job description not only sets the tone, the standard expectations, but you can also touch base on it throughout the year so that everybody's on the same page. Tax registration. So you have to register in each state where you are paying, where employees are located. So if their work location is their home address, if you're hiring remote employees, you need to make sure that you are registered in those states to pay those employees. So that looks like unemployment insurance, that looks like state tax, that looks like any sort of disability or leave that you have to pay into for those states. So it does vary from state to state, but the good news is most payroll companies are very well versed in this. So, you could always go to them and say, hey, I need to register for Rhode Island. I just hired somebody there, and they should be able to guide you in where to go, what you need to do. If they can't guide you, they usually have documentation on that. Workers' comp, you need workers' comp. If you have one employee, you absolutely need workers' comp. This is a benefit for you, your business, and your employees. So absolutely make sure that you are signing up for workers' comp. I usually say if you have any other type of business insurance and they offer workers' comp, just go with that provider so that you can have it all in one location. Employee handbook. I know I talk about this all the time, but it really does set the standard for your business and your team. It allows expectations to be clearly written out. It's one location for everybody to go to for answers. If you have one employee, you should absolutely have an employee handbook. These are all things that are absolutely mandatory when you have employees on your team. So if you're doing the conversion, you still need these things. Another step in this process, though, is talking to your team about it, about the conversion. And I know a lot of leaders and owners really avoid this, like they dread it. And I get it, the anticipation is usually worse than the actual conversation. And honestly, yes, you may lose a few people. That's a completely honest statement, right? Some people want to continue to be contractors and have the freedom to do what they want. But in reality, they didn't have that freedom. They were working for you full-time technically. So make sure to have that conversation with them and let them know it protects them as well. Covers them under unemployment, workers' comp. They get overtime if they're hourly. And they do have certain protections that they currently don't have as a contractor. So, I do think that it's important to let people know too that you're not taking something away from them. You're giving them benefits essentially. I really also do recommend offering some paid holidays. Small businesses, some can't afford to do that, but I really encourage you to at least do like 5 paid holidays. And, as you grow, as you become more profitable, you can add to that. Something that's a perk for employees versus contractors is that they get paid for things like that. So think about paid holidays, think about paid time off. These are all things that you can give to people to encourage and entice them to sign on as employees instead of continuing to be contractors. Another perk, in my opinion, is that they get taxes taken out immediately for them so that they're not required to pay quarterly estimates. So I think that that's always a nice to have sometimes too. And in addition, they'll be eligible for benefits should you choose to provide them down the line, unlike a contractor. And if you're located in a state that has paid leave, mandatory paid leave options, they would be covered by that as well. So, a contractor in New Jersey doesn't get paid family leave, but an employee does, as well as paid sick time. So think about those things, and I think really highlight them. It's about selling because people don't like change, right? So you do have to make it enticing. Make sure that you're explaining the why behind it, right? Like, it's really important, I think, for people to understand why that shift is happening, and hopefully that they want to stay on and continue. If not, there are ways to think about, are there projects you can bring them in on as contractors, but just know you can't have them continue doing the work that they were doing in the capacity that they were, because it wasn't legally compliant. So I think it's also important to have real contractor agreements for all of your contractors. And I get asked this question quite a bit. I know when I work with people and clients, I provide them with an agreement, right, that states the nature of the work, the scope of the work, the timeline of the work, the cost of the work, when I'll invoice them, how I'll invoice them, when it needs to be paid by. Any sort of like mutual agreements end up in there. And it protects me and my business, and it also protects the work that I'm doing as well as the other business that I'm working for. If I disappear, they have this solid contract in place. So it's really important, if your contractor is not providing you with an agreement, for you to have one yourself, to really define the scope of work, the timeline, the cost, all of the above, so that it's clear, everybody signs off on it, and you're all on the same page, okay? And it's really important that you, if there's an expiration date on it, make sure that you're following up with that. You should be, if they're continuing on, re-engage in another contract, another timeline, and make sure you're up to date on those things. The other thing you need to pay attention to is budgeting. So employees do cost roughly 20 to 30% more on their base pay once taxes and comp are all in. So make sure that you're planning that, right? I would say shoot for that 30% because it's always better to overdo it. It's still incredibly cheaper than if you were to get audited and have to pay penalties. So make sure you're budgeting that in. Maybe it's one full-time person doing the work of 2 contractors, and that's how you save, right? So think about ways that you can budget appropriately for this cost. So make sure that you're really taking a look at this holistically, right? What looks right for your business? Do your audit, go through your checklist, make those adjustments, make those changes. One thing I do really want you to think about too is the nature of your business, the growth of your business. It's really, really hard to grow with a solid foundation when you only have contractors working for you. Employees, you can mold, you can train, you can have them do the work the way you want them to do it using the tools you want them to. So if you're planning on scaling, growing, and building your business, employees really are a good solution for that. Now, I know that gives you a brand new job as a leader, but we'll talk about that in other videos. If you have any questions, if this is causing you anxiety and is giving you a knot in your stomach, please let's set up a free discovery call because I promise you I will make you feel better during that call. You can comment discovery below or go to my website, kdzhrconsulting.com to reach out. You got this. You're going to end up in a positive situation. Just make sure to take action. Until next time.